Today I'll be showing you how I made this mountain range painting with a real-time tutorial. This painting was made using Paul Rubens watercolors and Maya gouache. You can use really any other brand that will also work, but we are doing it with watercolor and gouache, so I would recommend that you follow along using both of those. The colors in this painting are a lot of blues, yellows, and greens with some brown and some white. You will not need any purple or red based color for this painting, so you're just going to want to pick a couple of different blues, greens, and yellows, and then maybe if you have a Payne's gray, that will also be good for this. I already have my sketch down, so the first thing that I'm doing is going to be starting with mixing some paint for the sky. I used a cool toned blue. This means that the blue leaned a little bit more towards green than purple, and I added some white to it. This right here is just gouache. It's not watercolor yet. So I've mixed that blue with the white, and I'm just going straight in on the sky, and I'm going to fill up the whole sky with that blue color. If you want to, you can add a little bit of water to the page to kind of blend things out, similar to the way that I did, but you don't really need to. This layer doesn't need to be super duper clean and smooth. It can be a little bit patchy because we're going to be covering it in another layer later on, but I like having it a little bit patchy because I feel like it makes it look a little wispier with the clouds. You're also free to add a little bit of variety with the blue here. If you want to use maybe a little bit of a warmer blue and blend it in, that can create kind of a nice variance between the blues. So it's really whatever you want to make it. You don't have to follow this tutorial step by step perfectly. You can really make this your own as you're creating your piece. The next thing that I do is work on the foreground and the closest little greenery area. So I've taken watercolor and I've mixed this green. My watercolor set already came with green, but I did add a little bit of yellow to it just to make it a little bit more natural. It is still very green, but I am filling in this lower section completely with green, and I am going to add a little bit of variance to it over time. So I'll add a little bit more yellow to my green mixture so that it looks more natural and maybe like there's a little bit of sunlight on it. And I'm going to fill the whole thing up until that section is covered. I did end up moving away from the lemon yellow with the green to more of a cadmium yellow with the green, which made it a little bit darker once we get lower to the end of the page. So I did add some different kinds of yellows into my green mixture, once again to add some variance and to increase visual interest. Here you will see I switched from one of my smaller watercolor brushes to one of my larger ones. I am not really including the sizes of these brushes just because I don't really care as much about brush sizes. I just think whatever gets the job done will get the job done. You don't really need a specific brush size for these. Other than the smaller details, you might want a smaller brush. So bigger brushes cover a bigger area, smaller brushes cover a smaller area, or can still cover a big area, but it'll be a lot slower. So once again, that's up to you. If you have a round brush that's larger that you want to use, that's good. If you have, I don't know, a filbert brush that's smaller that you want to use, that also works. Here I'm taking some of my green watercolor and I've mixed it with just the smallest bit of black and some water to make it pretty thin and transparent. And I'm going to be covering that first little hill, and we're going to cover the whole thing and do a real light thin wash of watercolor over it. Now we're going to start working on the mountains in the background. So I'm going to be mixing some of that blue watercolor with some of the green watercolor to create kind of like a turquoisey teal color, and I'm going to be covering the darkest area that's going to be shaded. This is not normally how you use watercolors. Normally for watercolors you go lightest to darkest, but because I know that I'm going to be using gouache over this later, I don't really mind that much. So I'm covering this area that is the darkest shadowed area, and I'm going to cover it really, really dark and dense, and then I'm going to put water on my brush and help blend it out with that water. I blend it all the way out to that upper edge to kind of define the mountain and separate it from the background so that I can see where it is better, and I just completely blend it out into that white space so that it has a wash of color on that background area. I'm doing the same process with the mountain further back, but instead of using a turquoisey color, I am using Payne's Gray. Now, the Payne's Gray in this watercolor set that I have, the Paul Rubens, is very, very blue. It's not like a very gray color, it's a very blue color. So I'm doing the same process, and you're going to see that this turns out to be like a really interesting, pretty blue. That's why you don't really need Payne's Gray for this if you don't have it, because blue will also work. You just need a blue that you can do this process with. While that wash of color is still damp, I will take a little bit of that watered down Payne's Gray and just dab a little bit along it so that it creates a little bit of texture for the mountain. Then I take the Payne's Gray and I do the same thing along the dry portion of the paper where the mountain is, and I'm going to take, again, some water on my brush and help blend that out a little bit. I'm also adding a little bit of green on that mountain just to make sure that it still looks like a mountain that has some greenery, some trees, and foliage on it. Now we're going to take some green on the closer mountain and repeat that process of adding some shadow and then blending it out to create depth and texture. As that dries, I take a flat bristled brush and dip it in some dark green and create these little slash marks to represent grass in the foreground. This can also be done with a fan brush or a regular round brush that is smaller. It's just going to take a little bit more time if you have to make each individual strand of grass with a smaller round brush, but it still can be done. I have done it a lot of times before now. As we move up the grass area, I am adding more yellow to my green mixture, just once again to create some variance and represent that it is getting further away. The further away things are, normally the lighter in color they're going to be, because the atmosphere is going to block some of the clarity of your view. This is why whenever you're looking at a mountain range off in the distance, it's going to appear blue and faded compared to maybe some mountains that are closer up or some grassland that's closer to you. Now we're coming back around to that hill that I showed you earlier that we painted that light wash of green. We're going to go in with an olive color. We're going to shade about the top portion of it completely solid. It's okay if it's a little streaky further down where it tapers off, because we're going to be taking an even darker green and covering the bottom portion and then blending them together in the middle. This portion can be done with a thicker layer of watercolor, however, I am using gouache for this portion. Now we're going in with sort of a blue-green, but not quite teal, and we're really defining that space between the foreground and that first hill. We are going to blend that up a little bit, and it's going to turn into a tree line later on. So we're going to make almost vertical strokes that are going to turn into, once again, some trees. If your vertical brushstrokes look a little too harsh, you can always take a little bit of water on your brush and kind of blur them out, blend them out a little bit. Here I'm going in with a small brush and some Payne's Gray, or if you're using blue, a darker blue, and I'm just tapping in these little dotted lines to represent some trees that are really tiny and far away. I'm just doing that inside of the shaded area on the mountain. Now I'm repeating that last step, but on the lighter portion of this first close mountain, and we're creating another tree line on that that's gonna get a little bit blended out and mixed with some other colors later on to make it more natural looking. Here I'm taking a tan colored gouache, which you don't really have to do this part, but I did, and I'm defining that section that is the light portion from the dark shadowed area a little bit more. And I'm coming in here with another olive or army green and filling in that section because I feel like it's a little bit too light and it doesn't look as natural as it should. So I'm blending that out into that first wash of color so that it looks a little bit more natural and is darker overall. Going back in with a cream colored gouache or a light tan that can be made with a brown and white, I am also adding some more highlighted areas on that mountain just to show that there is some variety in the altitude and the height and all that good stuff. Taking some more Payne's Gray, we are defining the outline of the back mountain from the rest of the foreground hill and other mountain, and we're going to blend that out with a little bit of water. It just adds some more shadow and depth. This is the part where we rinse and repeat a lot of the steps that we've already done, where we go in with Payne's Gray or an olive color and we just add more shadows, blend it out a little bit more, add more dots for the trees, blend that out a little bit, add more highlights and gouache, blend those out. So you're gonna do a whole lot of mixing and blending and adding stuff on and blending it out until it looks right to you, or like you have a lot of shadows and a lot of detail. Now you're going to take your darkest green and make these little vertical lines. Like we said earlier, this is going to be a tree line. So you're making the shadows and the tree trunks here. You're going to do this all over that front hill, as many as you want, as little as you want. I put a whole lot because it is going to be kind of like a forest, and we're just doing those slash marks all the way over, and then we'll move on to the next portion. With a really old brush that's kind of smushed down funny, I am stamping it in that dark green color and then stamping it onto the page. This is going to create a foliage look, and we're going to do a whole lot of that so that it blends out, and we're going to do it in a couple of different color layers. That way it shows where the sun is hitting the back of the trees, where the shadows are under the leaves, and all of that. Now you'll want to take your medium tone green, which is probably your olive or your army green, and stamp that all over your dark green layer of foliage. You don't want to cover the whole thing, or it's not going to have the effect of having certain parts with shadow or certain parts with light hitting it. You're also going to take an even lighter green or a yellow and do the same process once again on top of it, but don't cover all of it. If you really want to, you can take a small detail brush and go in and add individual little leaves on some parts with your dark color, your medium green, and your light yellow. This is what I did. I'm not completely sure if I like every part of it that I did here, but I do think it adds, once again, a little bit more detail. And I will say, I apologize for continuously saying variance and variety and detail, shadow, highlight, but that's really what we're doing here. It is a lot of shading, adding details and highlights, and blending things. And after you get the hang of it, those things become very easy to repeat in different paintings. This is where your brown gouache comes in. We've already created this shadowy tree trunk effect using that dark green. Now you're going to take your brown gouache and create teeny tiny little brown tree trunks and branches that go up into your leaves. You don't have to connect every single branch because the leaves do hide portions of the tree, but you can connect parts of them, and you're just going to repeat this process all the way down the line and getting smaller and smaller until you kind of taper off. If you would like to, you can also add highlights on top of those little teeny tiny tree trunks using that tan color that we made earlier. The good news is we are almost done with our painting. The last things that we're going to do is touch up the sky a little bit here in a little while and add flowers. You don't have to add flowers, but I add flowers to almost every single one of my paintings. So here I am taking a yellow ochre, or kind of like a dark, more brown yellow, and I am just tapping little teeny tiny flowers on this field. I love painting flowers this way just because all it is adding dots a little bit sporadically on the page. They're not super detailed, they are really not that hard to do. If they look really circular, that's fine. If they look clustered, that's also fine. So I am taking this yellow ochre and I'm going to tap them around all the way over to the top of that little grassy field area. I like to try and make them smaller the further away that they get, and maybe a little bit more spread out, but it's not a requirement. You don't actually have to do that. Next, I'm going to go in with a lighter yellow, maybe like a cadmium yellow or even a lemon yellow, and repeat this process of tapping in the little flowers. It is 100% okay if they overlap with some of your previous flower dots. It's actually better that way because it looks more natural and it looks less like you actually tapped in all of these little dots one by one and were overthinking it. So I like to do this. Adds a couple of like little colors and it just makes it look like there's a bunch of wildflowers. And now I am adding in a third yellow. This is going to be the lightest one that I have. It is going to be the last yellow that we add for flowers, and once again I'm just tapping those in wherever I want to put them. Now for the final touches with the flowers, I am going in with my extra teeny tiny brush and tapping in some white flowers. I like to make my white flowers a little bit more clustered, so they're not as spread out, they more appear in clusters that are spread about the rest of the flowers. I think it looks really interesting, and I love the way that the little white flowers look whenever I add them to my paintings. We are on to our final stretch of the painting. Here we're going to take a light blue gouache, or if you don't have light blue, mix a blue with white in your gouache, and you're just going to cover the entire background as much as you want. It doesn't have to be a super thick layer. You can let your original wash show through some. It just needs to cover the whole thing, and it's okay if you cover where we originally designated clouds. That's fine. We're going to paint the clouds back in later on. With the same old brush that we used for the tree foliage, you're going to want to take that and put it in some white, and you're going to stamp on that white to the clouds to create this fluffy, cloudy, whimsical, light and airy texture. After you stamp in your first little bits of clouds, you can go in with a smaller brush and add some more white on the areas that you want to be more full. And if you want to, you could add in some more streaky and long clouds with that same brush. That's what I did here. I was just adding some more details. the sun, you're going to take one of your smaller paintbrushes and paint a little round circle in white gouache. And then what I did was took a little bit of the lightest yellow and I went around the perimeter of the sun and just made it a little bit yellow to indicate, it is a warm sun. As you can tell, the mountain that's furthest back is kind of blending into the sky, so I am going to finally take this last little brush, last little bit of Payne's Gray, and just define it one more time from the sky so that you can really tell that it is not a part of the big blue sky, it is a separate thing by itself. So I'm just outlining it again, and I'm going to blend that out one last time, and that is pretty much it. I really hope that you found this tutorial helpful. If you would like more long-form, real-time tutorials, please let me know and I will see about what I can do. If you do follow this tutorial and you want to post your art or show it to me, you could always tag me at PhilophonArt on Instagram and I will see what you made. I think it would be really cool to see if anyone else tries this out. As always, if you like the video, like the video. If you like my content, subscribe to me. And I hope that you had a fun time and I hope you have a great week. I will see you next time. Bye.